Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm Dave Robinson. My colleague Dave Garrett and I are here in the Blueforest studios. We really appreciate them providing us with this beautiful studio where today we're going to be talking about essential businesses with 3/4 of the United States under some form of a stay-at-home notice, whether it's a state or county or city, municipality order. It is ever so critical nowadays for businesses to make this determination as to whether they're essential or not. My colleague and I, of course, are observing proper social distancing here today. First and foremost, we're going to be talking about the legal implications and ramifications of these stay-at-home orders. But, bottom line, in this day and age, we need to be staying away from each other. And so even though Dave and I have been deemed essential as lawyers, we are 6 feet apart. We've got our hand sanitizer. And you know what? I'm a Japanese diplomat, so the honorary consul for Japan here in North Carolina. Dave's been to Japan a lot of times. And so, you know what? This is the value add, I think, for everybody.
Let's do this.
We're going to teach you how to bow Japanese style. That's our contribution to social distancing. So, hands at our side.
Hands at our side.
We're not going to be making eye contact because that's just creepy. So,
And rude.
Good morning. Konnichiwa, David-san.
Konnichiwa, David-san.
There you go. So,
Easy enough.
now I'm older than he is, so he was supposed to bow lower. That never happens. But now you've learned something, a little cocktail party knowledge to get us started. Self-introductions. We're both lawyers at Nexsen Pruet. It's a 200 lawyer firm with 8 offices in the Carolinas and relationships in 75 of the largest business centers in the world.
Now, normally our practices focus on employee mobility and moving of goods across state lines and actually across international borders. And I think it's very interesting that now today we're talking a lot more about employee mobilities within the United States. Normally we're talking about moving employees between the United States and other countries and from other countries into the United States, and also the movement of goods from the United States to other countries and from other countries into the United States. But today we're finding that we're going to be talking an awful lot about, well, just the movement of employees and goods here within the United States and even perhaps within a state, or perhaps within a city, between different cities within a state.
Yep. Nexsen Pruet has a number of resources. We've been issuing client alerts faster than I think we've ever had to do. Businesses are needing almost real-time guidance as COVID-19 and the pandemic unfolds. We have a website, nexsenpruet.com. And there's a COVID-19 page, lots of articles, everything from
the basics about coronavirus to a lot of really, really good essential legal resources. We highly encourage you to take a look at nexsenpruet.com and check out the COVID-19 page. There's a lot of really good legal advice from lawyers across both North Carolina and South Carolina.
So just to kind of choreograph what Dave and I are going to be talking about today, we're going to start with the North Carolina stay-at-home order. All North Carolinians are now under this order, which went into effect this past Monday.
Right. In that North Carolina order, we're going to be using this kind of as an example of other stay-at-home orders that you may see in your own state. So a lot of other states have their own versions of stay-at-home orders, and we'll be talking about how North Carolina's may differ and how there's a lot of differences between the different stay-at-home orders.
And we'll compare and contrast a little bit too. Mm-hmm. We're going to talk about a couple of other states that have taken a different approach here. So certainly if you're a business and you've got people traveling around the United States, we're going to try to touch on sort of the nuances of what some of our adjacent states have been doing.
And next, I think that we should talk about, there's some county declarations and perhaps some city declarations also. So we'll talk about the interplay about that.
And you're going to want to stick around because once we set the playing field up for you, you're going to find that a lot of businesses are simply just going to have to come up with their own decision as to whether they're essential or not. And they're going to have to self-certify.
Yeah, and that self-certifying of businesses can be really, really important. On the one hand, you want to make certain that you're open for business, that you're serving your customers and your clients, and also able to pay your employees. But at the same time, you're also faced with the very real challenges of how to mitigate your activities to sort of deal with the current disease that's out there.
And so our challenge right now is we are used to giving presentations to large audiences. There's currently no one in this room with us, and so we would welcome your questions as we engage in this conversation. If you have specific questions related to your business, you can either pose them now and we'll try to address them in the 45 minutes or so that we're going to be talking, or you're welcome to contact us at any time as well.
Exactly. So let's get started. So let's start talking about and as an example, let's take a look at the North Carolina stay-at-home order. David, what is this about? What are we supposed to really be doing with this?
So North Carolina, like most states, it's been an evolution, right? You had a couple of counties get out in front of the state even and say, hey, we're gonna do our own stay-at-home order. And we're essentially telling people, if you're not essential, you need to stay home. And because one of the biggest forms of congregations of people, if you will, is the workplace, they've now tried to identify, hey, which businesses are at most risk for spreading the COVID-19, and also which businesses are so essential to the workings of our economy that we're going to exempt them from that. And so North Carolina, what happened eventually is because of the patchwork of these declarations, Governor Cooper issued Executive Order number 121, and we're gonna kind of go through that because as states go, I think we're gonna find that it's in the middle ground, and I know a number of the people that are watching us today are from North Carolina. So let me unpack that. Dave, chime in with examples or anecdotes, and interrupt me at any time. But like every other executive order, it's going to start off with a number of whereas clauses. Now, that's not applicable to your business, but it's important to us as lawyers.
Right, because it provides a lot of interesting background as to where this particular order fits into the grand scheme of things. What were the reasons for the order? And sometimes it can be very important to understand what the reasons are for the order in order to interpret the order itself and what the terms of the order mean.
Yeah, and so North Carolina, 2 pages of whereas clauses. Lawyers get blamed for having too many whereas clauses. He's got 2 pages.
That's not so much in some other states. I think for South Carolina, how many pages were in the whereas?
I think they have 5 pages of whereas clauses. So now we're mostly talking about businesses and COVID-19's impact on businesses. But North Carolina's order does start out with individuals. And it starts off with a very broad declaration saying you must stay at home and you must practice social distancing. Not sure, someday we'll find out who came up with 6 feet as the magic number, but it's a broad statement that North Carolinians should stay at home if at all possible. Does permit some essential activities. And those essential activities are, for your health and safety, to go to the grocery store and procure services and goods, outdoor activities, as long as it's not any kind of a large gathering of people.
And you're practicing social distancing, of course.
Yes, and it includes volunteering, traveling between different residences, but as Dave said, all subject to the social distancing mandate that the state has now declared.
But let's get into the really nitty-gritty details. What is this essential services thing?
All right, so essential services. So if you are essential, you may, within certain parameters, stay open. And you can thereby require your employees to still work. If you are non-essential, you are not allowed to mandate that your employees continue to come to work. There are certain businesses that just, you are not allowed to stay open. Now, that said, quick caveat, if you're not allowed to stay open, you can still do certain basic minimum activities.
This is really important. For example, if you're processing payroll, you can't have somebody go to the office and travel to the office in order to process payroll. You can perform the minimum things that are necessary to protect the investments that you have in your business, including your physical assets and security.
Yeah, and if you've got an inventory that's going to spoil, anything that's basic minimum just to keep the business so that you, at some point in time you'll be able to reopen.
That's right. So it's somewhat kind of loss mitigation, but the very essential things that have to be done.
And I think the second takeaway from the essential declaration is even if you are essential, there is a strong preference in this order and every other order that if someone can telecommute, if they can work from home, right, you should be encouraging people to do that.
Yeah, I think that's really key right now, even for essential employers. For in most cases, even essential employers have a class of workers within their company that are not truly essential. For example, you may be a company that designs boxes. And as a box designer, you have decided that you're within this essential critical infrastructure because you support shipment and transportation of goods and materials. Well, what about your social media designer, the person that is taking pictures of your products and is posting them on your company's Instagram account? Is that something that can be done at home, or should we be requiring them to come into work or not?
Yeah, so if you've got employees where the only reason you're requiring them to come in is you don't trust that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing at home, I think you need to rethink that. If somebody can do their job at home, there's a strong preference under North Carolina law for you to allow them to do so.
And under every other state's orders that I've reviewed.
Yeah,
same thing.
agreed.
So if a particular worker is not an essential worker within themselves, within the company, try to find ways to keep them busy and keep them employed, but find ways so that they can telecommute, that they can spend as much time out of the office as possible.
So in addition to that sort of broad declaration, in North Carolina, a number of states, again, we'll talk about it in a minute, take sort of a different approach, but not North Carolina, 29 other categories of businesses have been declared to be essential. The first one is probably the largest carve out, and we need to talk about the federal government just for a second.
Right, exactly. So the federal government, they issued a series of guidelines to the states. Now, there's no federal preemption here. That means that what the federal government says does not control everything across every state. That is not the case when it comes to this type of order. The federal government has merely issued guidelines that the states, each state individually, and perhaps even below that, depending on the states and how the state's laws are structured within that state, the states and its local governments can then interpret the federal guidelines.
So I guess we always assumed that someone was in charge of this, but there is a cybersecurity and infrastructure security agency in the federal government.
That's CISA.
CISA, and who knew they existed, but they're all anybody's talking about for the last 10 days. They've identified 16 sectors of the economy that are critical and essential. And North Carolina, a lot of states have relied on those categories to as a basis for their order. And I'll read just a couple of them. We're not going to go through all of them, but of course, things you would expect: energy, dams, manufacturing, but also, of course, food and agriculture, critical to North Carolina's economy, healthcare, public service, chemicals, commercial facilities. These broad categories you can do a deeper dive into each of these categories if you just Google CISA.gov. This agency, again, has been tracking what's deemed to be critical to the United States.
But even then, even when you dive down and you try to go as deep as you can through the federal guidance, you're going to see that it's very broadly written. And in many ways, I suspect that these designations were not exactly written to be used in the manner in which they're used.
Yeah.
It really kind of seems to be almost like it's an internal study, it's an internal designation, but then suddenly the CISA, the CISA guidelines have been thrust into the forefront, and they're being used for a lot of different things that perhaps they weren't contemplated to be used.
Yeah, agreed.
So does your business fit within one of the essential categories? That's a tough call.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about what you're going to want to be thinking about when you self-certify. Next two categories, equally broad. And in fact, the order itself says it should be construed broadly, which is healthcare and public health operations and human services. Again, not just the providers in those segments of the economy, but folks that are supplying goods and services to them as well.
Right.
It's going to include a lot of North Carolina businesses.
So if you are a business that's downstream, that is maybe you produce maybe the industrial size glass scrims that are used in future medical devices. You manufacture a part of a part of a part that then goes into something that is being used and has been clearly designated as being critical. How do you actually claim to be an essential industry in today? And frankly, as things are progressing, I'm fully expecting that we're going to have further lockdowns and further narrowing of the funnel of what are considered to be essential services moving forward.
Yeah.
So how do you prove that your worker coming into work needs to get there? And really, I suppose the ultimate question is what tools can a business give to their employees to be able to talk their way through perhaps a roadblock from a local police department or perhaps even a National Guard? What do we do?
Well, so pet owners, you'll be happy to know that under healthcare, veterinary services are included. But again, to Dave's point, before we go through some of these other categories, which I think are more specific to actual business segments in the economy, why don't we talk a little bit about the letters that people have been giving their employees, just to follow up on your thought, which is a good one.
Exactly. So, a lot of employers are giving their employees letters and those letters should really be designed to allow the employee to give them the ammunition, perhaps, give them the evidence that they need so that they can show a local police officer that they do need to go to work, just in case that there is some stoppage of that employee's mobility and traveling from home into work. What should those letters contain? Well, they should probably contain, like a short description of the company and a short description of how that particular company is deemed one of the essential critical industries. Remember that who the audience of these letters will be. The audience will be most likely a local police officer who may not have the time or the will to read through a lot of things. So, a multi-page volume describing about how your company, is an essential critical, that's probably not going to be the most helpful thing here. Something else to consider is that the letter itself, by itself, may not be enough. You may want to also advise your employees to bring some confirming evidence, some secondary evidence of their employment with the company. For example, a business card might be a good one, or lacking a business card, maybe perhaps a recent pay stub. That way they're able to show by secondary evidence that not only do I have this letter, but I also have a pay stub, I have a business card that matches my identification that shows that I work for this company and this company is designated as a essential critical industry.
Yeah. So there's just a number of categories here, right? And folks need to be looking at
let's look at
their
those categories.
state.
Yeah, let's look at them.
I'm not going to go through all of them, but there are some catch-alls. And when we start talking about how you actually go through the process of deeming yourself to be essential, the key is these are all sort of pegs to hang your hat on, if you will, right? Mm-hmm. These are you need to be referring to the specific language here. There are some catch-all categories that folks supplying goods and services that are normally found in an essential business. Now, since grocery stores and gas stations are considered essential,
those seem to be easy.
That's going to include a lot of companies. Obviously, media services, Blueforest Studios, where we are right now, legal services. As far as I've seen, no state has ever called lawyers non-essential, and so
Pennsylvania, I believe, did.
Really?
Yes, Pennsylvania, I believe, did. And Pennsylvania was a little different the way they handled that. And David, I think you wanted to mention that.
Yeah, let's talk about. I think we've seen a couple of extremes, and the micromanaging in Pennsylvania is just epic, absolutely epic. The governor of the state of Pennsylvania decided that they would outline every conceivable segment of the economy, and then they created a chart. And this chart says, can you open, yes or no?
Right, it's a spreadsheet, and it's very draconian. It defines each type of business, and within the different types of businesses, subtypes of those businesses. Like you would think that the production of metal, which could be used, of course, for not only national security but for other things, would be categorically an essential critical industry. And under the CISA guidelines, under the federal government, it clearly is. But here's an example of that, and like Pennsylvania's micromanaging of this. They even said they said non-ferrous metal processing is not an essential industry. So if you were in, like, say, the aluminum business or another type of non-ferrous metals, you're out of business, even if those products are going to be used later on, perhaps in the manufacturing of steel and other ferrous metals.
Well, and take even further down the supply chain, you are allowed to rework purchased steel, unless, of course, you're sharpening it into a cutlery, in which case you are not allowed to do it. That's Pennsylvania. Folks are not thrilled, businesses are, of course, not thrilled with that approach. It has resulted in probably closing more businesses in that state than we've seen in other states where it's a more general approach.
And
but certainly there's certainty associated with it.
There's a lot of certainty about that, but if you're one of those closed or affected businesses, and your lawyer is no longer an essential service, I think you've got a problem, because how are you going to find any type of relief from that if you don't have access to your lawyer, and your lawyer now has no access to the courts?
And then you see states like our neighboring state of South Carolina, where they've essentially said you can stay open unless you're on a list. The reverse of what North Carolina has done. They have said you may stay open unless you are a bowling alley, a restaurant, and they've listed a number of segments of that economy. So different approach there.
Exactly.
North Carolina's, again, the presumption is stay at home unless you're essential. And again, you can refer, we're not going to read through them, but you can certainly refer to, again, the 29 categories in North Carolina as, I think, fairly representative of the types of businesses that most states believe. There's different weights, of course. We're weighted more agriculture. We're very interested in fresh fruits and vegetables, and so that'll be specifically stated here.
Right. And of course, it depends on what state that you're in as to the interpretation of these orders. In North Carolina, as an example, we had local counties and some local cities impose their own stay-at-home orders, but to be followed by the state. And under the North Carolina's legal structure, the local order takes precedence. That is, the local order can be more restrictive than the state order. And if you're in one of those locations that is affected by a local order, you not only have to look at the state order, but you also need to understand what you're able to do under the local orders. But in other states, there's a lot of argument about that. South Carolina is an example of that. Several days ago, in South Carolina, the city of Charleston issued a stay-at-home order. But then the state attorney general issued an opinion that reiterated a previous opinion that said, well, local governments in South Carolina don't have the power to do that. So if local governments do that, this attorney general basically said, you do that at your own peril. He was speaking, of course, to the local governments. But that has not stopped some other local communities and local governments in South Carolina from issuing their own orders. But to be followed by the state issuing a broad blanket order across the state.
Yeah, so if we've got advice for people watching from North Carolina. If you're in a different state, pay attention to what is preempting, what actions may or may not be preempting something that you've been reading all along. North Carolina, again, to Dave's point, two real clear takeaways. What the governor has done does not void any of the local, Wake County, Durham, Buncombe, Mecklenburg, doesn't specifically void any of those. And secondly, that it's not the final word. If a county wants to do something, if the county wants to say legal services are not essential, or if they want to say 10 people is not the appropriate number for a gathering, we're going to reduce it to 4. Those county ordinances, those county declarations will prevail in North Carolina. And again, that may or may not be the case in your state, but certainly that's the case here.
That's right. And remember that the federal guidelines are just guidelines. The federal guidelines don't establish any minimum law. They don't say establish a maximum law. They are merely guidelines that the states can interpret.
Yeah. And so in North Carolina, violation of this order is a Class 2 misdemeanor. I think there's some misdemeanor associated with a lot of what other states have done as well.
In fines.
But in fines. But really this isn't about martial law, right?
No.
This is not what the Chinese were doing. This is not, we're just, that we're not there. And I don't know that this country would ever go there. But this is really about something else, right?
It is. It's really about, I think, trying to make certain that people who are not in one of the critical essential industries are staying at home. It seems to be we're trying to be working on this together, and only those people who are deemed to be essential critical workers should be out and about.
And so if you haven't reached the same conclusion that we have, we're going to spell it out really carefully for you here, or very succinctly. The onus is now on businesses to self-certify. There's a lot of guidance here, but ultimately a business needs to make the call. And there are obvious, there are risks associated with that.
That's right. And those risks, can be very real. So if you are a business owner, if you are in the decision-making process for deciding, are we essential critical? There are so many different considerations. It's almost mind-boggling at this time. The first primary consideration is going to be, how are we going to be able to maintain operations? Because we need cash flow. Cash flow must come in. Cash is king. And if we are not able to service our customers who pay us, then how are we going to make our payroll? That's usually the next question. How are we going to make our payroll? And so there's a natural tendency, I think, for companies to first say, I'm essential critical, even perhaps if they're not. And there could be some risks with that. And the biggest risk that I'm concerned about is that, David, when we're watching late night TV, and I know that you watch a lot of late night TV, not only are you watching the products that are say, as seen on TV, and you probably still have a Flowbee.
Oh yeah, you order them right here, right?
Exactly. You also will notice that there's a lot of plaintiff lawyers that are out trolling for work. They're looking for potential litigants. And one of my concerns right now is for a company to make a false designation, or perhaps an erroneous designation, or a designation that was not accompanied by some forethought. And they've decided to say, hey, we just got to stay open, because otherwise I'm not able to make payroll, and how am I going to keep pay for my rent? How is the business owner going to be able to pay for the rent? Well, remember that those plaintiff lawyers are out there, and they're going to be looking for opportunities. What happens if one of your employees come into the workplace, and at the workplace, that's where it's identified that they've picked up the virus? And then what's worse is that if that particular employee is what lawyers call a thin skull plaintiff, that is somebody who perhaps are the ones that are going to get hurt. That's going to be the one, right? But on the other hand, what happens if one of your employees then later takes that virus home and gives it to perhaps their elderly mother, who they are the primary caregiver for? What type of liability could the business be facing in the future? I think that's going to be the biggest question later on. And as a business owner, that certainly gives me a lot of pause.
Yeah.
Even within, say, my office, as a legal category, we're in North Carolina, we're deemed to be essential critical. We are sending and keeping our employees busy, but at home. I haven't seen my legal assistant in several days, and my paralegal, I don't think I've seen her for the past 2 weeks, because they're working entirely at home. Even though they are, clearly, we think, within North Carolina's definition, we are still doing as many mitigation things as we can in order to reduce the possibility of spread within the workplace. Because what happens if somebody does get sick?
Yeah, and there's no guidance that anyone has received yet as to what a business needs to do from sort of a CYA standpoint.
Right.
There's just nothing with respect to COVID-19. However, having been practicing for some number of decades ourselves, we can look to other federal statutes and other federal situations, the certain tax situations in particular, where we can look for some best practices.
Right.
And the best practice here is contemporaneous documentation.
Now, this contemporary, what is that again? Contemporary.
Let's go with contemporaneous documentation.
Contemporaneous documentation. I think that could be very key, but it's also, I think, something that you have to be very careful about in compiling.
Yep.
Because when we're projecting, let's put our lawyer hat on for a couple minutes, and
Right.
when we're thinking about this, what is the primary type of cause of action? What could employees or somebody else, a member of the public, be suing us for in the future because somebody got sick at our work site,
Right.
or at a property or something that we control as an employer? Well, most likely it's going to be negligence, and whether or not it's going to be gross negligence or if it's mere negligence or someplace in the middle. Well, that's probably where we're going to be looking at. So with negligence, there has to be a duty. Do you owe your employees a duty of care? Under the OSHA General Duty Clause, you absolutely do owe
Yep.
each and every one of your employees a general duty of care. Even if you're not in the construction industry or an industry that's heavily regulated by OSHA, all employers are covered by OSHA's General Duty Clause. So yes, we do have that duty. And then after that, has there been a breach of that duty? Did the company breach its duty by requiring its workers to come in? And that's where the critical question lies.
Mm-hmm.
Has the employer breached its duty to employees by making a false or incorrect designation of being essential critical services? And then after, do you have the duty to breach? Did that cause the actual damages? And with the causation elements, there's actual cause and there's proximate cause, which is way outside of the scope of what we want to talk about today. But in the end, is there any damage? And well, if somebody dies because they come into work and they got sick, oh, we've got damages. So that critical step.
And they'll be looking at it
right.
they'll be judging a decision made 2 years earlier.
Who is it going to also be made by? It's going to be made by people sitting on a jury, acting as a fact finder in a court of law. And these jury members may be very, very sympathetic because perhaps the majority of them were not essential critical workers. They had to stay at home. They lost income. They lost a lot. And here's an employer that perhaps did not make the right choice. And an employee got sick, and the employee's sickness resulted in damage, and that damage, in some cases, maybe as high as death. I think we're going to have a lot of very unsympathetic juries in the future.
And so a defense that we shudder to think would be some business owner walking in and saying, I just had to meet payroll, so I declared us essential.
Right.
What we are advising companies to do is using the best available data to make an informed decision and enforce it uniformly.
Remember that most companies' insurance policies, your D&O insurance, they do not cover for gross negligence events. And if it's labor found to be a gross negligence, if it's found to be an intentional tort, which most negligence cases are, unless it's a criminal, and that could be possible also. But most insurance policies covering businesses do not cover intentional torts. And also, a lot of insurance companies insurance policies do not cover pandemics. They don't cover this at all. So while your business continuity insurance may be able to kick in place if you find it and decide that you're not an essential critical industry, your other insurances may not be there to help you later on. You may be on your own as a business owner.
Yeah. So if you're relying on the CISA guidance as suggestive of your staying in business, let's get a copy of that, put it in a file, show that someone actually read it. If you are relying on a particular category in the North Carolina order or your state's order, let's put a copy of that in the file. So the first level of analysis is, and we'll get to the second level, but the first level is, can your business stay open? Is the business essential?
Right.
And if you are we need you to be able 2 years from now to say, here was my thought process.
Exactly.
Here's how I came to this decision. It was responsible. Now, but there's a second level to the analysis, right? Once you alluded to it with your legal
Talking about
assistant.
the business, right? And when we talk about the business, we've got the business covered now. We think that we have it adequately documented, and we would encourage you to work with your attorneys as to how to adequately document it, because I think it's going to depend on your business, on your industry.
Yep.
For a lot of businesses, it'll be like really obvious. We're a hospital.
Yeah.
Obviously.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, for some other businesses, you're going to have to really kind of walk the reader through the analysis as to why you are in essential critical industry. Mm-hmm. And so once you've done that, the second level has to do with the individual positions within your company.
Correct. Again, even if you are essential, under North Carolina's order or any other state's order, you still have this overriding social distancing responsibility. And if an employee can do their job from home in North Carolina and other states, you have an obligation or certainly an encouragement to allow them to do so.
And perhaps from a risk mitigation point of view, you have a duty to do so. When we're talking about negligence again, perhaps you should find ways to have your employees work elsewhere rather than at your facility.
So even the Department of Defense, which says if you're a defense contractor, we need you, but that doesn't mean the guy mowing the grass is covered.
Right.
I
And
mean,
by analogy,
they say this in writing, so.
we extend that over by analogy to individual companies. And I think that using the defense contractors' notices like that is perhaps a really good way to begin to analyze whether or not the individual positions within your company are truly to be essential or not. You should try to find ways to reduce the number of people at your office. That way you are protecting your workforce, which I think later on, a year from now, 2 years from now, that those actions to protect your workforce may actually become more important than the actions that you took in trying to make certain that, hey, we're getting dollars in the door so that we can still continue to pay our employees.
So big question we're getting. Companies don't like this uncertainty. They don't like having to do this self-certification. It makes businesses nervous, even if they are doing that. And the question we get is, well, isn't there someone who can call us essential, and then therefore we're just locked into, we now have this assurance that some government agency has declared us essential?
Oh, I have an answer for you that. Maybe. That's the best answer we can give right now is, well, there might be. And even if there is, and it depends on each state that you're in, is that a step that you want to take as a business owner or not?
I think that's the key. So, North Carolina, early in the days, there was a re-entry certificate that we use in North Carolina with our hurricanes and whatnot, where you could register with emergency management.
Right.
A
And that
lot of
seemed to be
companies
really kind of focused in on
they
the
did
hurricane
that.
relief, and so that we can allow contractors to go into counties that had been temporarily closed because of the damage due to hurricanes.
Yeah, it didn't make a lot of
Didn't work very
sense
well.
for COVID-19, even though a bunch of companies filed, overwhelmed the system as we understand it. In North Carolina, South Carolina, a number of other states, not Pennsylvania, unhelpfully, but in North and South Carolina, you can apply in North Carolina to the Department of Revenue for a declaration that you are essential. In South Carolina, I believe it's their Commerce Department. So it looks attractive.
It does, and particularly it's attractive because once you apply in both North and South Carolina, and this may be the case in other states too, then the act of applying allows you to stay open pending the decision. So pending the adjudication from the local authorities as to whether or not you're deemed to be an essential critical, you can stay open, right? So that's a really great, that's a Band-Aid. Let's put it on. This might work for 2 weeks. Okay?
Yeah, if you're on the fence, this
maybe,
does
right?
give you that opportunity.
But they could say no.
But they could say no, and that's
And if you say no, then, well, you've lost a lot of flexibility, I think, and in interpreting the state's guidelines, which then also interpret the federal guidelines. So you're perhaps maybe kind of narrowing your options by seeking that. But on the other hand, having that designation from a plaintiff's lawyer point of view, that might be some mitigations to taking a case against your company in the future. That's a tough call.
yeah. What you would do in that filing is you're in a gray area, right? And the gray area is self-certifying, and you move into a black and white scenario. Are you exempt or are you not? Are you prepared for a negative determination? I think companies that make that filing, we have no idea what the precedential value of that determination will be. I mean, we've just never seen a system like this before.
Right. We don't know if it's conclusive. Does this raise a rebuttable presumption, perhaps? And if it's a rebuttable presumption, how much evidence has to outweigh that presumption in order to rebut that? Now we've got the state that says that you're not essential critical, but you think that you are. Gosh, we're all walking into unknown legal territory here.
Yeah, so be really careful. Be very thoughtful before you fire off an email to the Department of Revenue seeking to be determined to be essential. I'm only really seeing that utility where businesses have a combination of functions.
Right, exactly.
You're a bowling alley in a grocery store and you want to shut down part and keep the other part, or I can see some clarification being useful for businesses like that.
And that might be kind of a good model, from even within industries. Do you have particular product lines that you can affirmatively shut down? Because those product lines are not essential critical products that are being out there. Do you even have customers for that at this point? Or will you have customers in the supply chain, 2 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 months, whatever your supply chain is down the line? Can we shut those particular lines down?
Yeah.
In order to protect our workers and also to stay compliant with the state rules and also to try to mitigate any potential future negligence or other litigation that could be coming from your employees. Let's face it, there are a lot of employees that are not happy with companies making an essential critical determination. And while the employees may be first now thinking, I have to come into work because I need this job, and I don't know what this future is going to be like, so I'm going to come into work anyway. Those particular employees may turn against you later on. And there's also the very real issue that we're beginning to see, like with companies like Amazon and Whole Foods, where we're beginning to see concerted employee action concerning their working conditions. And if employees get together, if they start working with themselves to improve their working conditions under the NLRB, you've got a concerted action going on. So there's a lot of considerations that face employers right now.
Yeah, the last question I guess that has popped up, and it's actually a really great segue into what we'll be talking about next week. I imagine is under the CARES Act that was recently passed, this $2 trillion bill. There's a number of SBA loans and other grants that are going to be provided to employers to keep their employees working. The government's going to pick up, in some cases, 2.5 months of your payroll under the CARES Act, and we'll be talking about that more in a separate segment. Where it overlaps with today's legal issue, though, is the issue of economic harm. And under the CARES Act, the government has made very clear that everyone is deemed to have suffered economic harm under the COVID-19 pandemic. And in some loan programs, you may have to be specific about what's actually happened to your business. But in the 7A loan program, for instance, where a number of these, the payroll loan language resides, you don't need to shut your business down in order to then be eligible for these loans to rehire your people. In fact, not only can you keep people on the payroll and still be eligible for these loans, but there's a credit even to some companies for rehiring people that they've let go.
Exactly. So I think more about that next week.
More about that next week. I think we're just about out of time and out of questions. If you have any more specific questions, again, David Garrett, David Robinson, we're both easily reached through the nexsenpruet.com website. The COVID-19 page has a lot of valuable information, everything from, can you deliver sake to your, as a business to a residence in North Carolina, to, these very, very technical tax benefits that have been provided under the CARES Act.
Exactly.
So again, Blueforest, thank you for hosting us today. It's a beautiful facility here. We invite everyone to please practice your social distancing. We're gonna sanitize now, and we just wish everybody please stay well.
Thank you.
Thanks.